Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 104 of the Feeling Good podcast. We had some listeners, one in particular, who requested that we talk about pain, both chronic and acute pain. So I'm going to read this question from our listener, Anne. And she writes, "Hi, David. I'm currently studying counseling psychotherapy in the UK. Last month, I discovered your podcast, then read your book, Feeling Good, and it was the first thing that really lit up my eyes and got me obsessively studying. Everything about your team CBT model is so compelling and inspiring. And first, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to share it all with us. I also have a specific question which I'd love to hear your answer in. In one of your Ask David episodes, my ambition is to specialize in treating patients who have chronic pain with no clear physical cause. I've had that problem myself for several years, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on psychological treatments for pain and how you might apply the team CBT model to those patients. Any wisdom you could have, you could share would have me on the edge of my seat. Thank you so much."
Okay, well, thank you for that. Let's launch right into it. I want to just give a quick promo for 2 upcoming workshops, then we'll go into pain on rapid treatment of trauma. This is a 2-day workshop I'll be doing in Pasadena, California, October 4 and 5, 2018, and also in Woodland Hills, California, the same workshop on November 1 and 2, 2018. And the second one, you can come in person or watch it. It'll be broadcast live on the internet. And for registration and details, go to www.iahb.org or call 1-800-258-8411. 1-800-258-8411.
Okay. And by now, I think that your website should be updated with those workshops listed.
I know. I'm so far behind. I mean, it seems I'm getting so old. I thought I was going to slow down and retire, and like every day, I'm getting more and more stuff.
Well, it's a choice.
Yep.
So, let's see about pain.
Pain. Let me start with a vignette, then I'll mention some research, and then talk about the team approach. When I was a medical student, I was hanging out one night in this bar in Palo Alto and sitting there drinking beer. And a fight broke out, and I was not in the fight, but somebody threw a beer mug at somebody who I guess ducked, or they didn't throw it straight. But I turned to look at the commotion, and I saw this beer mug moving toward my jaw in slow motion, like stop action photography, and then it hit my jaw and exploded, and blood came gushing out of my mouth, and I realized, well, that's just the sound of the garage door. We can put up with that. It'll stop in a second. And I realized that my jaw was broken, and I felt very vulnerable. I could feel that my teeth were loose, and I rushed out of the bar, got into my old VW, and drove over to the Stanford emergency room. And I was a little on the intoxicated side because I'd been drinking beer, and I was very frightened. And when I got into the emergency room, I had this perception that I wasn't being treated very well. So I was kind of angry also. I was probably a pain in the butt as a patient. And so they came in, they were examining my jaw, and I kept worrying. The pain was just excruciating. And then finally, they got x-rays, and they brought in there's another Oh, okay. They did X-rays. They brought in a plastic surgeon, and he said, you have a broken jaw. It doesn't look serious, but I'm going to have to do surgery in the morning and wire your jaw shut, and you'll have to drink through a straw for 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah.
But it's it's very straightforward, and everything's going to be okay. And then I said, well, am I going to lose my teeth? And he said, you've got 3 loose teeth, and but I think you'll be able to save all of them. We'll refer you to an orthodontist after we unwire your jaw, and he can check it out, make sure everything's okay. And he says, but I'm going to hospitalize you now. We'll do the surgery first thing in the morning, and I know you're in tremendous pain, and I want you to be comfortable, so I've ordered powerful pain shots for you. And I want you to have as many as you want all night long, because I don't want you to be in pain. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and he says, everything's going to be fine. And when he touched my shoulder and said, everything's going to be fine, I felt this relief, and all my anger and anxiety disappeared. And the odd thing was the pain completely disappeared at that instant. And I didn't need any of the pain shots at all.
Sounds like some hypnosis.
Yeah, almost like hypnosis. But what happened was that the moment my negative feelings disappeared, the pain also disappeared. And then in the last, I'd say, 20 years, I used to do a lot of statistical modeling at Stanford, and people would bring me their data sets. And I created some data sets. And so I had 3 data sets where I had pain intensity measured pretty accurately, and depression or other negative emotions over time. One was 1,000 patients in San Francisco with real pain, just like my jaw. That was real pain. These were arthritis patients.
Yeah.
And then I also, I was able to have 10 years of changing depression and changing pain.
Yeah.
And then I was able to say, what is the cause and effect?
Yeah.
Does pain lead to depression and other negative emotions, or do depression and other negative emotions cause or magnify the feeling of pain? And then I had a short study in the Stanford inpatient unit during the cognitive therapy groups, because we had a lot of pain patients there. So I'd measure their pain at the start and end of the hour-and-a-half cognitive therapy group, and then their emotions on the brief mood survey. How depressed are they? How angry are they at the beginning and the end?
Yeah.
And I looked at that, and then I had a third database that was also pain and negative emotions measured over time. And in all of them, the parameters came out exactly the same. And it turned out that negative feelings have a massive causal effect on pain and account for about half of all the pain humans experience. And it doesn't make any difference if it's organic pain from a broken bone or chronic pain that there's no apparent organic cause.
Would you say that it magnifies it, or it creates it?
It could do either one.
Yeah.
There's also a small causal effect from pain to depression, but it's so small as to be trivial.
Uh-huh.
But the one from depression and other negative emotions to pain, that causal pathway was large. And so the take-home message here was that if you're in pain and you're also upset, if you take my brief mood survey and you have elevated scores on depression, anxiety, and anger, and then you'd be willing, say, if I'm your therapist, to work with me to make those negative feelings improve or disappear completely, there will be a predictable change in your physical pain. And on average, half of the physical pain will disappear. But what on average means is that for some patients, the physical pain will disappear completely. For some patients, there will be no improvement in the physical pain, but at least they won't be depressed anymore.
Yeah.
And for some patients, it'll be a partial effect. And I can give you some more vignettes, a couple, to drive this point home, because that's all scientific and it's statistics and it's causal effects. People say, I don't know what any of that means. Go ahead.
So before you move on to that, so this is it tells us really one thing we can do about when you feel some depression. And the usefulness of removing depression in order to feel less pain.
Yes.
What happens if we feel pain, but we're not particularly depressed?
Well, then this wouldn't be a mechanism. If you don't have elevated levels of depression, anxiety, and anger, then this wouldn't be a modality for treatment.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be unusual.
What Anne is talking about, which is pain that sometimes has no detectable organic source.
The causal effect of emotions is identical whether there's an organic source or there isn't.
Right.
So it doesn't make any difference what, if anything, is causing the pain. The fact the pain exists, and if there are also negative emotions, then by addressing the negative emotions, you can address the physical pain.
Yeah.
And also, this is helpful for dizziness that has no organic origin too, or chronic fatigue that has no organic origin. Now, a slight spin on this is what we've talked about in previous podcasts called the hidden emotion model, which is one of the treatments for anxiety.
Yeah.
And what it means is that anxious patients often have some hidden problem they're not dealing with out of niceness.
Yeah.
And if you can bring that hidden problem to conscious awareness and get them to express it and deal with it and face it, often the anxiety will disappear. But I actually learned that model working at the Stanford outpatient clinic when I was a medical student, because we had a lot of patients who came in with physical pain that had no organic cause.
Yeah.
And so we would try to find out, is there something that the patient isn't dealing with? Now, I don't remember if I gave these examples on a previous podcast, but
no matter. Let's hear about it.
Yeah. Well, an ambulance came up to the front of the clinic, which seemed odd because usually the ambulances went to the emergency room, and then they took this woman on a gurney into our outpatient clinic, and she was screaming and demanding surgery on her abdomen because she had excruciating belly pain. And she had flown down her husband had flown her in from Alaska because they hadn't been able to, find anyone in Alaska who could, treat this horrible pain. And when I looked through her chart, she was lying on the gurney, her husband was standing next to her, and she was just screaming and saying, "You have to take me up to surgery." I looked through her chart, and she'd had 6 surgeries on her abdomen for this pain, and no one ever found anything abnormal in her abdomen, except the first time they found a bullet, and her husband had shot her in the stomach.
Oh.
And so I said to her, is there anything that makes the pain better or worse? And she says, yes. And I said, well, what makes it worse? She said, well, when I'm with my husband. And I said, what makes it
worse?
What makes it better? When I'm not with my husband. And then I said to him, would you mind if to just step out of the room for a moment so I can complete my examination? And he stepped out of the room, and she said, oh, I'm feeling better now. And so I had one of the...
Okay, you're cured.
Staff people came in, Dr. Alan Barber, and we saw her together, and we decided that she needed couples therapy rather than emergency surgery. But he had this company, and she was working on the production line 18 hours a day in his company, and she was angry, but she was too timid to express her feelings.
Yeah.
And it came out indirectly. This is her way of punishing her husband. Every time he's around her, she's telling him, I can't stand it. I can't stand being around you.
Yeah.
But she doesn't realize that she's doing it. She just knows she has belly pain.
Yeah.
And we saw tons of patients like that and dramatic recoveries when we brought the conflict to conscious awareness. You want one more of those?
Sure, yes.
There was this really nice guy that came in, and he'd had not pain, but dizziness for 8 years. And again, he had a thick chart that he brought with him. He'd been all over major medical centers, and they would do brain scans and arteriograms of his brain and heart scans and all these costly things to find out the cause of his dizziness. But everything was always normal. And so I worked him up and did a physical, and then I went out to talk to Dr. Barber, and I said there's something kind of fishy here too, I think. And So Dr. Barber came in and was listening with the stethoscope and, pretending to listen to the heart and the lungs, which he was in a way, but he knew everything was normal. And they said, well, call this, what's the name that we give this fellow, Jimmy or something like that. Jimmy, do you remember what was going on when the dizziness first came on? Oh, yeah, doctor, I remember. And Dr. Barber said, well, where were you, Jimmy? And he said, oh, Doc, I was at my wife's funeral. And then Dr. Barber said, well, gosh, that must have been awful. You must have grieved and cried, and what a blow that apparently his wife had died unexpectedly. And he says, no, I never cried about it, Doc. And Dr. Barber said, well, why not? He said, I didn't know if that was the correct thing to do. I've been kind of holding back, and I feel dizzy all the time. And Dr. Barber said, well, you look pretty tearful now. Maybe you need to grieve. Maybe it's time to do it. And then the guy just started sobbing. He'd been hanging on to his tears for 8 years.
He somatized it,
Yeah, and nobody thought to ask him, do you have a human problem? Everyone is doing these expensive
medical stuff,
Yeah. And then he cried for several minutes, and then Dr. Barber said, how are you feeling? And he says, oh, Doc, my dizziness was finally gone. And it just so interesting. So these are two related things about pain and physical symptoms and what we can offer as therapists. And we have some pretty powerful tools. Now, Dr. Barber said in his clinic at Stanford, this only worked for half of the patients. Half of them were so determined to have their symptoms of pain or whatever, they didn't want the psychological interpretation.
Yeah, well, here comes the agenda setting.
Exactly. But he was thrilled that with 50% of these patients, he could usually get a rapid and complete elimination of symptoms. But it could be anything. Sometimes it was just a woman, her kids go off to school and she's got empty nest syndrome, and instead of dealing with her loneliness, she develops somatic symptoms.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. I also, heard that this is even more likely to happen in certain population from outside of the United States who immigrate here.
Oh, yeah, true. I think the mind is powerful. You mentioned hypnosis. When I did my first surgery, and I was a terrible medical student, by the way, and you have a resident guiding you, and it was this fellow had a hernia. Yeah. So we were fixing his hernia. It's supposed to be a simple surgery thing, and they were kind of practically guiding my hands and showing me what to do. And then I was tying something up, and then the older resident said, that you made a mistake there. You tied off the such and such nerve, and he's going to be in excruciating pain. So we've got to fix that. So we untied the thing that I had sewn up incorrectly, and I said,
"That's when you just said, I'm going to be a psychiatrist."
Well, no, it was actually fun because what I said was, "Oh, this is great. He won't feel any pain now when he recovers." Of course, he was anesthetized, but I was talking to his subconscious mind.
Yeah,
I figured I don't have many medical skills. At least I could do something psychological.
That's right.
And I said he's going to just feel so good, like as if he was hypnotized. I was talking to him. You're going to wake up. You're going to feel so good. You'll have no pain. You'll get right up out of bed. You'll be able to walk immediately. And I didn't know if it would do any good. And then a couple hours later, the nurses came to me excitedly, and they said, "He has no pain. He jumped right out of bed." It was so interesting.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, great. I hope this is useful for Anne and other people who are interested in treating chronic and acute pain. And
there's other stuff, like you could do acupuncture and things like that, but this is more powerful.
Team is just one way to approach this.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, thanks. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.